JK, President of Bolt. And do we also have Dr. Johanna Sanadaki here? Yo, great, wonderful. Chief Innovation Officer from Erdico ITS Europe. Thank you all for being here. We will start just with an introduction round. If I could ask you to introduce yourself and your organization and what your organization is doing in terms of road safety. And JK, since you're sitting next to me, we will start with you.
Hi. Okay. So I'm Evgeny Kabanov. Everybody calls me JK. And I'm the president of Bolt. Bolt is a global shared mobility company. We're present in 45 countries. Our services include ride-hailing, micromobility, e-scooters and bikes, and car sharing, as well as delivery services. And we actually have one of the largest micromobility fleets in the world with 250,000 vehicles deployed in over 300 cities. And for us, road safety and safety generally is a huge thing. And I think specifically the topic that I'm really interested in is digital monitoring and enforcement of safety issues. We had a lot of learning from the micromobility area, where basically the speed limits are, like we have, in all cities we have geofencing where the speed limits are imposed, parking limits are imposed. And, and it's a really interesting topic, which is also, we're now starting applying to car sharing, where also where people basically rent a car. We also monitor the speed limits. We do a lot of fighting the drunk driving. And I think a really interesting conversation to have is that the shared mobility services are now in many ways safer than the private mobility, and how can we apply the lessons learned also to private mobility.
Thank you. Saeed, from the World Health Organization.
Thank you very much.
I think it should be on. They're managing this from the
Thank you very much.
Control tower.
Thank you for having me also on this panel. Thank you. Nice meeting my colleague. I work for the World Bank, and I manage a team that really look after the road safety aspect of the World Bank. We have the Global Road Safety Facility, which has existed for about 17 years now, since 2006. And really the aim of the bank, because we sit within the bank, we try to really catalyze and inform the World Bank road safety investments, whether in infrastructure, but also to help move the needle into the big financing of standalone road safety program, which are multi-sectoral. And we have seen a couple of these lately. The bank and the multilateral are the biggest financier of road safety, and they will keep playing a big role. So it's very important that we make sure this financing is as safe as it can get. I'm not sure if you followed the press release, but earlier this week, all the MDBs got together here. Thanks for the ITF for the opportunity to bring as many of us here. And we announced that over the last 5 years, 7 of the multilateral have committed financing of $3.6 billion of road safety. Of course, when you look at what's needed, this is not much, but when you look how much that financing is affecting or can potentially affect even the country programs, this is really a substantial contribution. And this is really the core of the objective of the facility for the new decade, is really to catalyze as much as much possible financing. Lack of funding has been obviously acknowledged in the global plan. We know what to do. I think Jean mentioned explicitly the solution is there. We know a bit of how, but we don't know the how totally. But definitely we don't have the funding really. So just to give you an idea, if we want to solve this problem, we are talking about in the order of magnitude between $300 to $600 billion in additional over the 10 years, of course. And this is a lot. But there's a lot of also opportunity going now into the transport sector, especially under the decarbonization agenda. There is a lot of opportunity. We need to look at it from the financing angle. How can you use the momentum of the electrification also? There is lots of opportunity, and that's how we would like to address the issue. There is lots of challenges, of course, by adding millions and billions of cars and motorcyclists and scooters. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we use this as an opportunity not just keep challenging and blaming each other who's responsible. The core of the safe system is that the shared responsibility. I think John mentioned it. Everybody has to have a role. If there is no car, there is no crash. If there is no, everybody has to contribute, but the world has to motorize and the world has to move. So it's a shared responsibility, and many countries has made some improvement. I mean, I can fairly, when we didn't have the latest, but since you ask also the question, a couple of Latin American countries has done very good, Brazil is on a good path. I mean, we will be looking closely at the new number, but if Brazil really made up what we think is happening, it's a very good success story, because Brazil is a very big country and Brazil is a federal system. So that also will help us tackle the issue of the administration. I will be in Mexico soon, so I will be happy maybe to meet with my colleague and answer the question he has. Who is responsible for road safety in a country like Mexico, and who is accountable? The bank has done a lot of this work, so we'll be happy to share our experience and maybe see how we can collaborate. But again, I would like to congratulate you on the law. It's and we work together on the law together with the Inter-American Bank. It's a pioneering law. So lots of happening, but more needs to happen on the how, not on the what. The what, I think, has been made. The case for road safety has been made. Now we need to get into the action and do stuff on the ground. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Saeed. Raquel.
Thank you. I'll start with a reminder that road traffic injuries are the leading killer of youth aged 5 to 29. That's about, on an annual basis, it's about 1,000 youth that dies on the world's roads. It's more or less about the size of the ITF summit, if I'm not mistaken, this year. So yes. My name is Raquel Barrios. I am the projects director at Youth for Road Safety, yours. We are an international organization that is working with and for young leaders so they can demand and deliver road safety and sustainable mobility. Through capacity development, through advocacy opportunities, and youth mobilization, we work in a youth empowerment program that is supporting them so they can meaningfully influence policies and take part in all the decision-making process that concern the number one threat, that is road traffic injuries. Today, we have more youth than ever in history. It's about 1.8 billion, if I'm not mistaken. So there is a big opportunity to ensure that these adolescents and adult youth are thriving and are generating, are becoming the economic workforce, especially in low and middle income countries. The thing is that this group, youth, also inherited a transport system that is failing them, a transport system that is not allowing them to thrive, and that it's also blocking their access to education, blocking their access to job opportunities, and in general to blocking their productivity and their potential to grow. So in short, if the current policy and investment approaches fail to meet their needs, then youth will continue falling short of potential. So basically, that's what we do at yours. We set the stage to create an intergenerational collaboration between decision makers and youth, so they are meaningfully engaged and involved in all the decision-making process that concerns about their lives.
Thank you, Raquel. Nan.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and part of this panel. I'm Nan Tran, and I'm the head of safety mobility at the World Health Organization. And as Raquel has said, the main reason the World Health Organization is involved here is really because the impact of health and the lack of safety on the world's road is tremendous on health and the health system. So the health sector actually bears a great share of the burden of road traffic deaths and injuries, as I think was highlighted, which we estimate to be roughly, for every death, there's roughly 20 to 50 injuries or serious injuries. And in fact, the World Health Organization was the first organization to put out a report in 2004, I think, which played a pivotal role in highlighting the public health impact of road traffic deaths. And it was that World Health report in 2004 that shed light for the first time that road traffic crashes, at that time it was estimated to cause about 1.25 million deaths per year, were a bigger cause of death than some of the other causes of death, which we thought about. Road traffic deaths cause more, road traffic crashes are more important in terms of the disease burden than diseases like HIV. And it allowed the world to really put into perspective the investments, the attention that has been put into other causes of death, such as, for example, HIV, AIDS, malaria, etc., that actually contribute less to the overall health burden than do road traffic crashes. So I think that was really what the World Health Organization has done. And in addition to that, WHO plays a coordinating role within the United Nations. We help to bring together different actors and different sectors that contribute to mobility and transport. And we're trying very much to frame the issue of safety as an enabler of sustainable development. And in that light, in that regard, we are really working very closely with different partners, including the World Bank, and I'm really glad to see representatives of the private sector, but also civil society such as yours, which I would like to take some credit for, not me personally, but yours was in fact an organization as well as the NGO Alliance that were shepherded in largely with WHO support. And just a minor correction to Raquel, it's actually 1,000 deaths a day that impact youth. So over a period of a year, you're talking about close to 400,000 youth that die every year. And I think that's really why we are encouraging the engagement of youth and organizations that are actually looking at this. My final note on this as we start is that for us, as we look forward to the new decade, which WHO really spearheaded in both the last decade and this decade, we really want a different type of engagement. The first decade, I think, was really focused on calling attention to the enormous burden, both health, financial, and otherwise, impact of road traffic crashes on our societies. And this decade is really about how do we engage, as Jean has said, with all members of society and all sectors of society to really address this, because this is a complex issue. Transport and mobility are not things that we can do without. They are critical to the functioning of our societies, but we have to work together to envision a new, or to imagine, if you will, a mobility system, a transport system that is safe, that is accessible, that is equitable, and that is sustainable. And I think that's the challenge that we have today. And that's part of the reason why we're, I think, engaging with such a wide sector of stakeholders today. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Johanna.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this fantastic panel. I am the Chief Innovation Officer of Ertico ITS Europe, and we are covering Europe and Middle East. ITS is Intelligent Transport Systems, and I just came last night, very late, from Lisbon, where we had our ITS European Congress. We have one every year. And that is where we have all our members. We are membership-based. We have more than 120 members coming from different sectors, coming from both the private and the public sector. So ministries, cities, regions, the traffic industry, the OEMs, the automotive sector, the users, service providers, tier one suppliers. So 8 sectors involved in the mobility, in the transport system, coming together, working on intelligence in mobility, and safety is a given. It is in all our innovation projects, all our innovation platforms, all our work is underpinned by this fact that it has to be safe. First it has to be safe, and then it has to be accessible, affordable, and convenient, and all the other words that we like putting next to mobility. Of course, having been to the sessions before, I realized that Europe is special in the sense that, I wouldn't say more advanced, but we have really worked on the policies and on this cooperation between the public and the private sector and how to make things work with regards to safety, while other regions are maybe in the process of reaching that. But the fact is that although everyone talks about zero vision, zero fatalities, they are still there. And you heard the numbers, I'm not going to repeat them. But what we see and what we strive for, not only in Ertico ITS Europe, But in every work we do, and we pilot and we cooperate with the US, with Asia, with Australia, is this public-private cooperation, because it's the responsibility of everyone, all the stakeholders, even those that are not really immediately relating to transport. So I'm happy we're going to have a good discussion here.
Wonderful, thank you, Johanna. So I want to start the first question to you, Saeed, because we're talking a lot about economics today. We know that there's an economic cost on the GDP due to road deaths. What can you share with us from the work that you're doing on what is this economic impact?
Thank you for the question. As you know, the bank, we are of course a financial institution, but at the same time we are a development. So we do a lot also of the analytical work and knowledge, which we focus, or we would like to focus as much of it on our twin goals, which is eliminating poverty and boosting shared prosperity. Unfortunately, there has not been enough work in road safety traditionally, linking really road safety to economic development. And there is lots of numbers that keep floating. I will be reading some because I want to share some new numbers that just came up from the team late last week. So there are two issues here. So there is a socio-economic impact, which is based usually on willingness to pay and value of statistical life. That number is usually the equivalent of 2, 3 to 5% of the GDP. So totally is about 1.7 trillion we estimated for low and middle income countries. However, I use the word equivalent always in this. This is not the true economic cost. So if tomorrow we eliminate all fatalities, countries don't grow 6% GDP. So let's be very clear. This number is a socio-economic cost based on willingness to pay. Economists in the room would understand the contingent valuation and willingness to pay and so on. So what we are trying now to do is to dig a bit deeper into the poverty and the actual growth. So the latest, we've done a couple of studies. In India, for example, the decline in household income was sharper than high income. So 75% of the low income household has seen decline in their income compared to 50%. And this is a big number. In Albania, for example, 50% of the people who got into crash, they fall into the bottom 20% of the income. But the average of the country is 30%. And this is a very big difference, which tell you that this problem, it seems to be affecting the poor much more than the high income in the. Of course, this study is coming from 2 countries. We cannot make general statement, but those are very robust study based on really big research. I give you another number. Low income household were 3 times more likely to seek financial help than high income household after getting in a car crash. And debt were 3 times more among low income compared to high income. This is really a big burden. And this is a burden we don't talk about, because the global burden we talk about is not to be compared with really what these poor households are gonna go. The other burden that we looked at is, okay, how much really economic stimulation can you get by really solving this problem? Again, the numbers are not 6%, but the number of significant. We've done a big study a few years ago, and we look at the 50% goal, because the decade of action is the 50%. And we found out that the big countries in that study, they were some of the biggest countries, China, India, Tanzania, Philippines, they would grow roughly between 10 to 20% over the next 20 years. So if people manage to reduce 50% in 2030, then 20 years after that, they can potentially grow. And this is a significant number if you look at it into current, how much economies are growing or not growing. You have economy have been contracting recently, or depression, or 1%, 0.5%. So that is significant. Now, the biggest problem in all of that is the following, and this is a market failure that we have to somehow fix. The people who's losing the money are not the people who's paying to fix it. They're the different pockets. And the transport people usually who are fixing the road, or the police, they are the one contributing to the problem, but they are not the one paying the bill. The people who are paying the bill are the health. The health sector is really who pays the bill immediately. So we need somehow to fix that. some regulations also needs to be put in place. Otherwise, the private sector, there is no magic bullet for the private sector. There is a market failure in this, unfortunately. And this is where working on policy and regulation to fix that market failure so people can invest in this, because there is a bit of disconnect between who's paying and who's benefiting.
Thank you, Said, especially for the new numbers that you could share. But then let's go to you, Nan, because he mentioned specifically the cost on the health system. And then I'd like to get your thoughts, Johanna, as well.
So I think Said has highlighted a really important point. That was actually what I was going to say. And that disconnect is in part, I think, what makes this problem so challenging. I mean, the cost to the health system is enormous, right? I mean, and it's not just for the loss in terms, you can look at it in a number of ways. There's the loss of life, there's the injuries, there's the cost to the health system for actually treating, caring for the patient, the rehabilitation, all of that, and the lost opportunities. But I think that in part is actually the main disconnect that we're struggling with, is because the deciders, those who take decisions in transport and make decisions about how transport systems are designed, are not actually factoring in the cost of the health system. So, if you talk to the transport planners, they have indicators, metrics. I mean, I'm really glad, to hear that you're saying that safety is at the core value. And that's the ultimate message that we have, because, mobility, transport planning and urban planning don't often include a metric on health. So one of the things that we've been trying to advocate for from a health perspective is to say, can we integrate a metric that looks at the health impact of transport policies, of environmental policies? I mean, I was at a discussion a few months ago about decarbonization, and the solution was about electrification of transport. And they were talking about, for example, comparing that if the cost of the energy that required to charge an SUV was the equivalent for 20 motorcycles. So maybe the solution would be to move from one SUV to 20 motorcycles. And that may be a very sound environmental policy, but it's a horrible safety policy from our perspective. And I think this is where I think the importance of having an integrated indicator or a metric that allows governments to look at holistically transport policies and their impact, environmental policies and their impact, as well as the health policies. But I think that's really part of the reason why we underestimate the real cost of that. And as a final note, I think we also recognize more and more that it's not just the cost of the care, it's not just the cost of the death or the value of statistical life, it's the fact that mobility and transport underpin much of our lives. Imagine if we weren't able to come to this meeting today. And I know that on Monday, apparently there were some transport issues. How do you quantify the value of that? So that's a lost opportunity. And imagine if we were losing that on a daily basis. How do you quantify the loss of missing school? How do you quantify the loss of missing work? I think all of those things are actually part of what we're talking about. So when we talk about improving the safety of mobility, we're actually talking about improving the ability of citizens in a society to actually carry about their daily functions. And that, I think, is a very important cost to consider as well.
Yes, I'll actually take it from there. It's the quality of life that we are discussing now. Mobility is the quality of life, freedom to move, to go for education, to go to the hospital, to go to work, and it has been discussed all day. It is very important to have the metrics that you were talking about, to have KPIs that equally apply for the stakeholders from the public and the private sector. And it is a fact that lack of mobility or non-safe roads, because of course when the road is not safe, nobody's going to use it, it hits the poor or areas that are poor. There's no money because of that to invest on a safer infrastructure, and then you start this vicious circle. We see this triangle of infrastructure, the vehicle, and the user, and it is an approach that needs to see this triangle holistically, investing on infrastructure, investing or making the vehicle, and I'm not talking about the cars only, I'm using the word vehicle also for the micromobility, and make these systems better and safer, and then as Jean-Todt was talking about, raise awareness, educate everyone, not only the user on the street on how to cross the street, but also the users of the vehicles on how to take care and look around. And we are lucky enough to work on intelligent transport systems, digitalization, which is all about information from the infrastructure to the vehicle, to the driver, to the user. And it's this kind of connectivity and ITS that we are using in order to make the mobility system safer. And we have this holistic approach. And I can tell you more about traffic management, but I don't want to monopolize the discussion.
Well, actually, I think this is actually quite a good segue. I want to come back now to a couple things that you said. It's about quality of life, it's about freedom. And part of this is also new mobility options that are addressing a younger generation and some newer needs. And so I want to come to Raquel and also JK on where do you think what should be the investment priorities per se to also address the user groups that you guys are focused on in this space?
Yeah, so young leaders in general, and that is what I'm kind of representing here, are part of the vulnerable road users, right? So to take them from one place to the other, what they normally use is the pedestrian facilities. So that's one of the things that I would prioritize and will not only bring safety to them, but also will bring growth in the economy, giving more access to commercial facilities, for example. And the other angle would be public transportation, of course. That's something that is needed, especially in low and middle income countries, making sure that it's safe, that it's accessible, that it's affordable, especially for the younger generations, as you were saying. Another thing I would touch upon is the investment in creating this multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary collaborations between government agencies, between NGOs, between youth, academia. So whenever we're putting investment on the safe system and on the roads, we have this multidisciplinary approach that is needed. At the end of the day, that's how our society it's composed, right? But before thinking on how I would invest, I would analyze what is lacking the current system, right? What is happening with the current situation? And in order to do so, we need to consult people. We need to make sure, we need to listen to people, to the users, right? We need to make sure that their voices are taken into consideration in order to decide how we are going to invest. So before deciding on what you're going to invest, then you redesign the system. And by redesigning, you listen to people. Then you reallocate the resources, and then you invest. So, yeah.
So I think a really interesting statistic to look at that in Europe, 70% of fatalities in road safety accidents are actually not the people in the cars. It's the so-called vulnerable population, which is pedestrians, motorcyclists, cyclists, people on scooters. And I think this is something that is often missed, that when we talk about road safety, a lot of attention is on the cars, but actually the cars themselves are more dangerous to everybody else than actually the people who drive in the cars. And this should also guide investment into road safety. Right now, it's disproportionately allocated towards cars, but actually as the cities evolved, as cycling and micromobility take a larger role, it would be really important to increase the investment into the biking infrastructure, right? Which I mean generally. And there's a really interesting, another very interesting statistic is that obviously introducing micromobility has increased like injury rates in some cities, and then it didn't in some cities. And we looked into what was the difference. And the difference was that in the cities with good biking infrastructure, the incident rates did not increase. Right, and then in cities which don't have biking infrastructure, then actually the incident rates increase. And this is a big lesson to learn, and just like the importance of protecting the vulnerable road population shouldn't underestimate it. And this doesn't even only apply to Europe. one big inflection point happening in Africa that we're now observing, we're present in a lot of markets in Africa, is the introduction of light electric vehicles, so basically two-wheeler mopeds, and they're a really big opportunity to bring sustainability also to Africa and to other developing countries. I just more involved in that particular part of the world, and even there, like it would be great if more separated infrastructure would exist for those vehicles as well, right? To your point, Nan, that like yes, if SUVs and mopeds are on the same road, then it's really dangerous for mopeds. But that doesn't mean that there couldn't be regulation introduced which would have more dedicated infrastructure even for those vehicles.
And just maybe a follow-up question here. How important is the education piece with all of this? Because in many cities, from one day to the next, all of a sudden you have all these new scooters or form factors showing up on the curb, and not everybody exactly knows what the rules of the road are, per se. So what's your thoughts about that topic as well? And also, frankly, not everybody has the same baseline of facts on whether it's good or bad or, yeah.
Okay. So obviously, we now had, I guess, 5 years or so to see the evolution of the micromobility. And I think initially it was definitely a big issue that the etiquette of how to drive, where to drive, parking, whether to drive on pedestrian roads or only bike lanes, that has been it has been like a big issue, right? And today, both the regulations has evolved, but also people behavior has evolved a lot. And part of it was just kind of the natural evolution, right? It took decades to introduce cars at the volume that actually was impactful. You know, in the beginning, a person would walk with a flag in front of the car, so the horses would have time to move away. For micromobility, we had no persons with the flags, unfortunately. But I think today, both just naturally through people understanding how it works, but also through purposeful education. For example, Bolt has like now training programs. Like before you start a scooter, you have to go through a training program. We have safety schools. We have like parking schools, like just even things like campaigns and media coverage. We made a campaign, I think, in somewhere in Scandinavia. Now I'm blanking what was the place, but we kind of showed how made a very like viral campaign about good parking and bad parking, and all these things work, right? It takes time, but they work, and like both private and public sector should invest in just educating the people on how to do this well.
Jennifer, can I jump
Please, yes.
What Yevgeny has said, I mean, what you said actually about the difference in terms of the impact, in terms of the micromobility introduction in different countries, and the differences in terms of who's actually getting injured, those with in countries with good infrastructure and those in countries that didn't have the infrastructure that was ready for the adoption of micromobility. Actually, I think answers your question, Jennifer, would be my answer. Behavior and education are certainly important things, but behavior is a function of the system. You know, a few years ago, I was working on the ministerial conference in Sweden, and I had a Swedish colleague who told me, you know, Sweden is known worldwide for being the leaders in terms of road safety. And he said, I drive very differently in Sweden than I do when I'm in France. Because behavior, of course, rules are important. Of course, it's important to educate. Of course, it's important to sensitize. But we adapt to our settings. Our behavior, our comportment is always a function of the environment that we're in. So it is extremely important when you have the environment, when you have the bike lanes, the infrastructure, to actually inform the user so that they're aware of the rules and how they're expected to behave, because it's different. But you cannot rely solely on education to change the way that people behave. And if the approach is solely based on education, and if you have a system that requires solely education and informing, or if you have a system that is dependent solely on enforcement to make the laws work, it's a bad system. And I think that's really the point that I think that Yevgeny has highlighted, is that
you absolutely do need all of those things. You need enforcement, you absolutely do. You absolutely need education, but ultimately you need a system that is in a context that reinforces those behaviors that you want.
Saeed, you're itching, and I know Johanna, you're also.
Yeah, I want to stress on the point that none is, we can make education and campaign and all of that, but it has been said for many, many years that these are not effective road safety intervention by themselves. That's number one. Number two, this contradicts fundamentally safe system. The safe system would recognize that people misbehave and people makes error. So let's build a system to fix it. The safe system is not safer road, safer vehicle, safer road user as people would think. No, safe system is an approach that tells you people make mistake and the human body has a biomechanic tolerance of kinetic energy. Let's do a system that fixes that. Let's not educate people to be that. But of course, we cannot rule out education 100%, but I would not stress out that education is a standalone road safety intervention. If we get a lot of money to do it, it should come to the bottom. There is lots of things. And as Nan said, and we come from developing country, we behave totally different in different circumstances. That's a human nature. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much what I wanted to say. It is a system approach. It is a combination. Bolt doesn't do it alone. You don't educate users alone. You cooperate with other organizations. You have other stakeholders working with you. And we are talking about a system with different components. So you need the regulation, you need the framework, you need all the parts working towards it. So that is where I wanted to contribute to the discussion from the part of, on the topic of micromobility, because it is something that boomed suddenly with COVID-19. Nobody was prepared. Some countries, like the Netherlands, I live in the Netherlands, they have the infrastructure to actually accommodate for this boom, but some others, they took drastic decisions. And that is where we all realized that this is a hard negotiation for space. Space in urban areas and also outside urban areas, but mainly there. And who has the right and how can we regulate the use of space, not only when we're moving, but also when we're parking and leaving these micromobility vehicles. So that is where the entire discussion lies. How much we can negotiate space, how safe space can be for the different users, because we have all these groups claiming the use of it, that delivery trucks to bicycle users, to pedestrians, and so on. And that is where we change the mentality, and I think COVID helped us in this. And we don't see any more vulnerable road users, we see valuable road users. The same acronym for the ease of it, but valuable road users and a redesigning, as Raquel was saying, and reprioritization. And already it was happening in Denmark, in Copenhagen, where the city is prioritizing on bicycles, and the vehicles have a slower pace on the road, so more red traffic lights, which is an incentive not to use your car, and an ease with green waves on the bicycles, how to go from A to B faster. But this is a very conscious decision now, with no shame, because we are not, or we should not keep on designing the transport system for the cars, but for the valuable road users.
It's interesting, the education question, right? I'm not going to repeat what my colleagues have said, but I often get the question, right? Right when I said I work for a youth organization, then what are you doing to educate youth, that they are misbehaving on the roads, they are drink driving, they are drug driving, they are using the mobile phone. So it's about changing this or swifting this paradigm, right, of instead of blaming youth for being road users and, making mistakes, it's about using them or interacting with them as an asset and understanding that they can bring the solutions, because at the end of the day, they are users of the system that is affecting them. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
Young people don't drive so much. They use the road, but they don't use the vehicles. They're not the drivers. The drivers are older people, at least in Europe, as far as I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong. But young people are more into the shared mobility, the apps that are taking us into this multimodal reality, which is by many statistics and a lot of research, safer than the vehicles, especially if we take what you were saying about the 8 to 20 times more probable that the cause of accident is the car, and the people hurt or dying are the ones that the VRUs.
Depends how you consider young.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for example, yeah, and it's true what you're saying, but it's pretty much based in Europe. In Latin America, in my country, for example, you can get a driver's license at 16 years old. So, and you have no option to go from one place to the other rather than driving. Otherwise, it's impossible. So it depends on where you are analyzing the information. But in some, I would say, low middle income countries is something common, because you don't have other options.
Yeah, I wanted to also bring one more topic which is related, and this is about, we talk about investment in infrastructure, but there's another really interesting lesson to learn from micromobility, and this is this digital monitoring and digital behavior enforcement. So one of the, and there's so many examples, for education, it's not just education, but every user of scooters starts in beginner mode where their speed is limited, right? This is a combination of education where they get acquainted with the vehicle with enforcement, because they can't actually, they have to actively change the speed, and we don't even let them for some time, right? And this one opportunity where the infrastructure doesn't support safe riding, we limit the speed, right? With geofencing areas, and we do this work with the cities, and we limit the speed to 20 kilometers and even to 15 kilometers and so on, because the lower the speed, the less injuries. And this is something we've been doing for a while now. And then now we're taking the same lessons from micromobility, and we apply it to car sharing and ride hailing, where we monitor speeding, we monitor unsafe behavior, high acceleration, high deceleration, sharp turns. And right now we basically make suggestions and notify the people in the cars that they're behaving badly, right? For drivers, in ride hailing, we will actually warn and retrain and block drivers who are behaving dangerously. And the thing is that all of that makes today this shared mobility significantly safer than private mobility. And the challenge I have is that we absolutely have both the technology and even it's not a high cost to put a monitoring device in every car. It's about 30 euros and maybe €1 per month, even probably lower for the data, right? So we absolutely have the technical ability now to both monitor everybody's behavior and enforce it. So why aren't we doing it?
Yeah, I do want to get to one more question before we open it up to the audience. And this was a topic that we were also starting to discuss with Jean Todt, which was the interconnection now of road safety with our sustainability goals. And we know that they're very much connected, and even that this could be an opportunity to raise road safety on some of the agendas where already the SDGs are prime in focus. But I wanted to maybe start back with you, Said. How do you see the advantage or the interlink between road safety and the sustainability goals?
The linkage has been made very clearly. The road safety, it has a 3.6 or under the goal number 3. It has a big part of 11.2. But if you go beyond that, you have a couple of linkages with the health, with the accessibility, and then with the gender, with the equality to the various extent. But the biggest link currently we see, even though transport decarbonization was not explicitly as an SDG, right? But there is a huge link between road safety and transport decarbonization. It's very unlikely, to almost impossible, to decarbonize transport sector to the net zero goal and to keep it unsafe like this. We ran many scenarios at the bank and we couldn't find one for 3 reasons. One, you will not decarbonize very well and you keep the level of speed you are now. The speed has to come down. And when you have the fuel crisis, IAEA report was very clear. The top 10 measures, if you recall, of reducing the fuel consumption, which one, number one? It was reduce 10 kilometer your speed on the highway on average. And there was a calculation how many million ton of fuel comes. So that's very clear. Two, speed of the vehicle. It's very unlikely that clean, good vehicle in the second decade are gonna be unsafe. They have to be safer. And the three, which is most important, the big pillar of the decarbonization of the transport sector is active mobility. You have to get people active. You have to get people also in public transport. But if you don't do safety, actually we are gonna add to the problem. If you just ask everybody to start walking tomorrow, I think between us and WHO, we can do this modeling exercise. I believe ITF has done some kind of that. The number is gonna be roughly 3 million deaths. If you just ask everybody to walk today, we have a lot of that. And that's come with Yevgeny point that the places where they have good facilities for this type of micro-mobility or bicycle, they didn't have high, but the places where they did not have, they have a lot. So there is a lot of link between safety and that. And I think this is the biggest opportunity we have to change a bit our narrative from just purely how many people are dying to actually how much is gonna affect the global, we call it in the bank, global public goods, climate change. There's a very strong link, and let's keep that in mind. Thank you.
Nan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, this is a really interesting question. I mean, we have been trying to push for this link to be made very clear. And in fact, in the global plan for the Decade of Action 2021 to 2030, this was the central point. It was really about saying, the lack of safety is actually hindering development. And I'm framing this in a very explicit way. I'm not saying road safety, because I think the challenge of that is that if we really do want to frame this as a sustainable development issue, we also have to talk about it in that way. And we in the road safety community have to also change the way we engage. If we only talk about road safety and say that road safety is an enabler of development, we're not going to make headway. It doesn't resonate with the ministries of environment who are actively pursuing decarbonization, who are actively trying to reduce the emissions from vehicles. What we need to do is actually to be able to recognize, for example, that the decarbonization efforts that are taking place is actually part of our agenda, because what's happening with decarbonization is a discouragement of private vehicles, and less cars on the city roads, as we have just established, means it's safer for valuable road users, right? So, but we are not framing it that way. And the reality is, in most countries, national road safety agencies sit somewhere within ministries of transport, and I mean not at the Secretary General level, it's somewhere below. So if we talk about it only as road safety, it goes there. But if we talk about it as an issue of sustainable and safe mobility, then it's here. And I think that's part of our challenge, is to be able to reframe the narrative and to be able to empower the generation that's coming after us to realize that, yes, we should be involved in climate discourses. We need to be part of those discussions. We need to be part of the discussions about land use planning, because as you've said, Joanna, it is a power struggle about who owns land. And I think that we are stuck because over the last 100 years, transport systems are the ones that have actually changed the least, right? If you look at a telephone today and a telephone, 50 years ago, you would hardly recognize them. But if you look at a car today and a car 100 years ago, we're basically driving on the same roads. So for me, it's extremely exciting, actually, and it's perhaps not the best, I will get slack for saying this. This whole emergence of micromobility is actually quite exciting for me, because it's for the first time forcing us to rethink mobility, to rethink how we distribute land, and to actually engage in this discourse about who is actually controlling the land use. Who are we privileging, by actually designing roads largely for cars? So it's an opportunity for reflection, but at the same time, we also have to elevate our discourse. We also have to change the way that we engage. It's not just about saying road safety and make it safe. It's about saying sustainable transport and mobility is really important. It has to also be safe. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Perfect. Johanna, do you want to weigh in?
Well, I'm nodding because I fully agree. Well, there's no doubt. Sustainability and safety go hand in hand. And in the European Commission has helped the stakeholders of mobility set up the CCAM platform, which is the Connected Cooperative Automated Mobility Platform, or PPP, Public-Private Partnership, where you have all the associations working on automation and cooperative systems, ITS and so on, discussing and putting down the strategy for the years to come. According to the strategy, the funding is coming from the European Commission for innovation and research. And this entire, let's say, discussion, discourse, and movement is all about sustainability and safety, because we are going for automation, not for the money or for a few companies to profit from automation in mobility. We have understood that it's the human error that brings the accidents. Automation can help, it's not the panacea, but if automation is coming, it should be safe and sustainable together. It cannot be only automation for automation. So there is this understanding. The point is that this discussion that we're having here should also be backed with political will. Because when we're discussing about space, about funding, about research, about deployment, there should be the political will behind it and push for it, because we really mean it.
Thank you. I think we would open it up to the audience for a few questions. I think it's been quite interesting. So if we can get the microphones, we have a question in the middle and also in the back. Yep.
Heike Martensen from Kim in the Netherlands. I would like to ask Joanna to comment on Yevgeny's question. So for e-scooters, it has been very rapid within, let's say, a decade, that we started saying, no, this is not safe, and I think we should make sure that they don't go too fast, and that we should make sure that they park in the right places. Maybe we should go ahead and also make sure that they ride in the right places and that they just stop when they don't go in the right place on the road. So yes, for the cars, I mean, we have been praying for ISA for about 20 years. And as Yevgeny says, technically it's perfectly possible. But, well, let me say it that way. I guess, Yevgeny, to be honest, you probably didn't think like, oh, I want to make this safe because this is really important for me. I would actually think that you probably thought like, I don't want the cities to ban my vehicles. So maybe I better take into account their worries. And so why isn't it happening with the car industry?
I'm sorry, what is not happening with the car industry?
Why don't we see the same level of regulations on where you can park your car, how you can park your car? You're going too fast, you're going too slow, you're going in another lane, kind of the same control or awareness that's coming into the micromobility sector. Why is the car industry off the hook in our cities?
That's a very good question. Sorry, I didn't understand it immediately. It's a very good question. But why is it not happening? Because there's a long history of us designing everything for the comfort of or facilitating the movement of the cars in our transport system. Everything was designed for the cars. So what is happening now is the Commission, the European Commission, is coming out with regulations such as the RTTI and so on. And at the same time, there is this movement in traffic management where it's not anymore one authority imposing the rules and the regulations and the measures, but in dialogue and in discussion with the other stakeholders on making sure that things can be possible. So ISA is there, and we are progressing. The fortunate or the good thing with the micromobility is that it was caught in its birth. The car industry or the vehicles on the road have many factors to be dealt with in this dialogue.
But you do
that's
see
how
them,
it
I
is.
think, being regulated on speed, so slower speed limits in the city, and also taking away some of the lanes. And that definitely deters some of the cars, I think, in the city. Let's do one more question from the audience, and then unfortunately, we'll need to wrap up the panel.
Hi, I'm Deepthi from TRIPSI IIT Delhi. Question or comment? So first thing is with regard to education, yes, obviously it doesn't work. We had already seen a lot of examples. But I believe that capacity building of the officials, authorities, and enforcement, the policing, is something that works well. So we had been able to see over a decade that how the guidelines for construction of the roads has changed in India. And that is something which is applaudable as one of the strategy. And we at IIT Delhi has been partnering with various organizations towards building the capacity of officials. Second, when it comes to public transport is itself very safe. Our numbers show that no people die while they are inside a public transport system, especially within the urban areas. But the problem is when they access the public transport system. So we have to change our focus towards understanding and assessing how the public transport system access is safe, whether the boarding and lighting is safe or not. Third, when we're looking at the speeds and what are the co-benefits of the speeds, I would like to add one more. If the speeds are controlled in the city for the personal vehicles, then we can actually make our public transport system more competitive, which is not the case otherwise. Yep.
Okay. I'm not sure we had a question there, but thank you for those insights. You want to have one more question in the front? Thank you.
Thank you. More than a question, an encouragement. Most of you, when you talk, you say cars. I would ask you to say vehicles. Why vehicles? Because as we discourage the use of a car, then we will have more vehicles, professional vehicles, carrying goods or carrying people. And those vehicles should be safe. We should not think about cars. And now cars, we are encouraging electric cars. And when you see an ad of an electric car, you will hear 0 to 100 in 3.6 seconds. I wonder who's going to be able to control such an acceleration when it's just about 50 kilometers an hour. It will be almost impossible to brake if you see something crossing in front of you. So those two things. And how can you help so that these things are enforced? So that we talk a lot about enforcement. ITS is a good tool. ITS with telematics should be a great tool. So telematic control of vehicles should be a way to control speeds, to control regulation compliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good point. Let's wrap up the panel with just an insight from each of you on what we can take away from the work that you're doing in road safety.
I guess to summarize, would be great to see more investment into bike infrastructure and then use of more telematics and technology, both in light vehicles and all vehicles.
Yeah, what I took away, even though it was not 100% the focus of the session, it seems we need to do a bit more of effort, analysis to settle that issue between micromobility, safety, electrification, and I think this is a debate. We have not looked into it a lot, but you can tell there is a tension and there is a lot of groups, and it seems we need to come together somehow, how to make sure that we look after the whole thing. But I think this is what I take from this panel. We need to do more effort to understand a bit, without blaming anyone, right? But to see what is a good solution. But let's keep in mind that the problem is in low and middle income countries. What work in high income countries most probably will not work in low and middle income countries. Thank you.
From my side, well, yes, a lot of takeouts. First is aligning concepts and making sure that we're addressing the topic in the right way, right? So it's taken into, into our strategies as governments, as companies, as civil society, as a core value. She was talking about it. Include road safety as a core value. The other day, I was in a lecture with Dr. Nan last week, and he was saying, including road safety as a core value and not as a priority, because priorities often change. You know, if the government change, if the leadership change, then it changes. But if we include it as a core value, it won't be changing. It will be permanent in the whole strategy. Thanks.
It's good to know sometimes people quote you, especially someone's like Raquel. So for me, two takeaways. I think this whole discourse about micromobility sort of is interesting, but as Saeed said, a lot of the issues, you know, we see most of the deaths and injuries in low-income countries. But the point is not lost, is that for me, one of the things, as I said, is that it illustrates that mobility and transport are continually to evolve. I wasn't around in 1900s when the car was first introduced, but I imagine that the first car that was introduced where the horse and carriage were probably not seen very well, and they probably said, oh my gosh, this ridiculous thing is interfering with our transport. But mobility does evolve, and I think our challenge is to really embrace it, that evolution and that constant change. And the challenge for us is to say, as mobility evolves, how do we ensure that it's safe, right? That's the real challenge. And it means that we have to constantly work to improve and make it safe. It's not a one-time event. You know, I say all the time, road safety isn't a one-time event. It's not just about putting helmets on and then we're done. It's not about passing that legislation and then we're done, because tomorrow something else would change. And that evolution happens in ways that we least expected. I actually would say that, you know, the technology that has changed our mobility systems the most is not, you know, autonomous vehicles. It's not the, you know, things. It's this, right? It's the smartphones that have enabled the apps. As you're saying, young people don't drive anymore because they're using apps. Share rides app, it's all of the micromobility have been enabled because of that. So our challenge is really to keep up and to be open to those opportunities and to recognize how to take them. And I think the last thing is just to recognize that innovation, those changes are often introduced by people outside of the quote-unquote transport sector. So it's about thinking about how do we leverage that influence from those that are responsible for making environmental policies to reduce emissions, those that are designing things like that, as well as those that are in the health sector. It really requires a concerted effort from all sectors, but we have to be open to be able to think about who do we engage with and how do we leverage that influence if we really are looking at this as an issue of sustainable development, which I believe we are.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. It's a system approach. We should be approaching, first of all, safety is a core value again. We should be approaching the mobility system as we approach systems at different levels and with clear targets and KPIs. We are working on the digitalization of transport, of mobility, with intelligence, with smartness, with connectivity. And this is what we see, where we see mobility going. And this is how we're trying to make it safer, by sharing information among the different parts on what is happening, where, at all times, so that we keep things predictable. Because, of course, you always have the unpredictable, which is people. And that is where capacity building education comes in.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the panel discussion today. I think we could have continued it another hour, but unfortunately, there is the next program point, which for all of you, there's the Young Transport Researcher Award, a short ceremony that's taking place at the ITF stand right now. And following that is the gala dinner at the Glass Hall on level 0. So looking forward to seeing all of you there, and I hope you had a wonderful day today. Thank you very much.